Nina stopped trying to explain the watching on the 14th day. Not because Adrian finally believed her, he didn't, but because she'd realized language wasn't the problem. The city pressed against their 5th-floor windows in a language she couldn't parse, street signs and shop fronts, and the evening news all rendered into incomprehensible phonemes that made her ears tired. Adrian had grown up here, spoke the harsh consonants with native fluency, moved through the streets like water. Nina moved like stone, heavy and foreign and wrong. But watching didn't require translation. Eyes worked the same in every language. The apartment across the street had a single window that faced theirs. She noticed it the 3rd night, when Adrian was still at the office navigating his promotion, when she'd stood at their living room window with tea going cold in her hands and wondered what the hell she'd agreed to. Movement in that window, a shape. Not doing anything, just standing there in the dark of his apartment, backlit by some deeper room, watching their lit windows like a television screen. She'd mentioned it casually that night. Adrian had glanced over, seeing nothing. The watcher had already retreated, and told her she was tired from the move. Adjusting. The city took some getting used to. By day 14, she'd stopped mentioning it entirely. The notebook started on day 16, a small moleskin she'd bought from a shop 2 blocks away, the only transaction she'd managed alone, pointing at the notebook and holding out a handful of unfamiliar coins until the shopkeeper took what she needed. Nina felt absurdly proud of this small victory. She brought it home and began documenting. 4:23 p.m. in window, dark jacket, watching our bedroom. 6:47 p.m. in window, different position, closer to glass. 11:15 p.m. Adrian asleep, watcher in window, standing completely still for 23 minutes. She developed a system, times, duration, what he seemed to be looking at, whether Adrian was home, whether lights were on or off in the watcher's apartment. She started sketching the window, marking where he stood, tracking whether he moved left or right, forward or back. Adrian found the notebook on day 22. Jesus Christ, Nina. He'd flipped through the pages with something between concern and embarrassment, the way you'd look at evidence of an affair or substance abuse. This is. You need to talk to someone. I am talking to someone. I'm talking to you. No, I mean professionally. This is. He held up the notebook like Exhibit A. This is obsessive. You've drawn diagrams. You've got times down to the minute. Baby, this isn't healthy. There's a man watching us. You don't know that. You see someone in a window across the street. People live across streets from other people. That's how cities work. She'd taken the notebook back carefully. He's there every night. Same window. Always watching our apartment specifically. Or he's watching TV, or looking at his phone, or staring into space thinking about his own life. Adrian had softened his voice, reached for her hand. You're isolated here. No friends yet, no job, can't understand anything anyone's saying. I get it, but you're creating patterns where there aren't any, making connections that don't exist. The dismissal hurt worse than if he'd been angry. The kindness in his voice, the gentleness, the certainty that she was simply cracking under the pressure of displacement. She didn't show him the notebook again. On day 27, she saw the watcher at the grocery store. She'd forced herself out, armed with a list Adrian had written in both English and the local language, determined to accomplish something. The fluorescent aisles stretched out in overwhelming abundance, every label inscrutable, every other shopper moving with easy purpose while she stood paralyzed in front of 16 varieties of milk she couldn't differentiate. That's when she felt it. The specific pressure of being observed, different from the casual glances of strangers. Her skin prickled. The back of her neck went cold. It was the same feeling she got standing at her window, the same weight of invisible attention that had been accumulating for weeks. She turned slowly, already knowing what she'd find. 4 aisles over, partially obscured by a display of something in bright packaging, a man in a dark jacket. He wasn't looking at products. He was looking at her, not glancing, not accidentally meeting her gaze, looking, studying. The same patient observation she'd documented 53 times in her notebook, now transplanted into fluorescent daylight amongst strangers buying groceries. Their eyes met for exactly 3 seconds. His face was gaunt, pale in the harsh lighting, with hollow cheeks that suggested either illness or obsessive neglect of basic needs. But his eyes were bright, alert, satisfied, almost like he'd confirmed something he'd suspected. Then he turned and walked away, unhurried, not fleeing, just done watching for now. His gait was casual, purposeful. He didn't look back. Nina's vision tunneled. The grocery store sounds, scanner beeps, shopping cart wheels, incomprehensible announcements over the PA, became distant and muffled, like she was underwater. Her hands gripped the cart handle so hard her knuckles went white. She counted to 10, forcing air into her lungs, trying to decide if she should follow him or run. The decision made itself. She abandoned her cart in the middle of the aisle and walked quickly toward the exit, not quite running but close. The automatic doors seemed to take forever to open. Outside, she scanned the parking lot, but he was already gone, dissolved back into the city like he'd never been there at all. Her hands shook so badly she couldn't get the key in their apartment door for almost a minute. The metal scraped against the lock plate, missing the hole again and again, while her breathing came fast and shallow. When she finally stumbled inside, she went immediately to the window. The watcher's window across the street was empty, but in the time it had taken her to get home, he could have. She checked the notebook, added the entry, grocery store, dark jacket, daytime. He was expanding his territory. That night, Adrian worked late. Nina sat in the dark living room, her own apartment unlit, and watched the window across the street. The watcher stood in his usual position. She could see him more clearly now, had learned to distinguish the shape of his head, the set of his shoulders. He was tall, she thought, thin, patient. While she watched him watch her apartment, she began to understand something. Adrian wouldn't help. The police wouldn't help. She'd looked up how to report something online, spent 2 hours with translation software trying to construct a comprehensible complaint, but what would she report? A man stands in his own window. A man was in the same grocery store as her. No threats, no contact, no evidence that would survive Adrian's kind dismissal or a police officer's tired skepticism. The isolation was absolute, not just linguistic, not just cultural, existential. She existed in a space between languages, between believability and paranoia, where her reality couldn't be translated into anyone else's understanding. Adrian loved her but didn't believe her. The police would smile and nod and do nothing. Her family was an ocean away, unreachable in any meaningful sense. She was alone with this, completely alone. Which meant if something was going to be done, she would have to do it. The thought arrived with strange clarity, cold and smooth as glass. She sat with it while the watcher stood in his window, his silhouette patient and unmoving. Turned it over, examined it from different angles like a jeweler studying a stone. The moral weight, the practical considerations, the fundamental transformation it would require. Could she kill someone? The question didn't horrify her the way it should have. Maybe it should have sent her running to Adrian, to a therapist, to anyone, but it didn't. It felt like a practical problem to be solved. She had never been a violent person, had never hit anyone, never even fantasized about violence in any serious way, had never imagined herself capable of deliberately ending a life. But she had also never been watched like this, never felt the specific violation of invisible eyes cataloging her movements, learning her patterns, waiting for something she couldn't name but could feel approaching like weather. The watching had weight, texture, presence. It was changing her, eroding something essential, replacing certainty with dread. And she understood, with the same cold clarity, that he wouldn't stop. Men like this didn't stop. The watching was ritual, preparation, foreplay. Whatever he was building toward would eventually arrive, and when it did, no one would believe her then. They'd find her. How? In pieces? In photographs? In his apartment, like the red-haired woman she'd seen in that brief psychic flash? The moral calculus completed itself with mathematical precision. It wasn't murder if it was survival. It wasn't wrong if it prevented worse. She would be saving not just herself but whoever came next, and whoever came after that. The watching would stop because the watcher would stop. She would make him stop. The notebook changed after that night. Still times and positions, but now she added different details, routes, patterns. When he left his building, she'd staked it out from a cafe across the street, spent 6 hours over 2 days nursing coffee and watching the entrance. When he returned, whether he carried groceries, whether he was alone. She learned his schedule the way he'd learned hers, became intimate with his rhythms. There was something almost tender in it, this mutual surveillance, this dance of observation and counter-observation. On day 43, she bought the knife. A kitchen store, the kind that sold expensive equipment to people who actually cooked. She'd practiced the phrase, looking it up phonetically, repeating it until the sounds felt almost natural in her mouth. The clerk had shown her several options. She'd chosen the one that felt right in her hand, not the biggest, but balanced, purposeful. 8 inches of German steel with a handle that didn't slip. Adrian found it in the drawer with the other kitchen knives. Didn't think anything of it. Why would he? She began walking the route from her building to his, timing it. 4 minutes if she walked normally, 2.5 if she ran. The street between them stayed lit until just past 2 a.m., when the cafe on the corner closed and their exterior lights went dark. There was a period between 2:15 and roughly 4 a.m. when the street existed in darkness. Adrian slept heavily. Had since college. She used to joke that a fire alarm couldn't wake him. Now she was grateful for it. The plan assembled itself piece by piece, each component fitting together with satisfying precision. She would wait until he was in the window, knowing he was home, knowing where he was. She would cross while the street was dark. The main entrance to his building had a security lock, but she'd watched enough people enter to understand the mechanism, had seen it fail to quite catch when someone didn't pull it fully closed. She would find his apartment, 5th floor, corner unit, left side. She'd counted windows, cross-referenced with the building's exterior. She would knock. He would answer. Why wouldn't he? A woman alone, foreign, clearly lost or in need of help. The perfect victim presenting herself. And before he understood his mistake, before he could speak or move or process what was happening, she would put the knife in him. Not once, not twice, as many times as it took to be absolutely certain. Then she would walk home, shower, put the knife in a bag weighted with rocks and drop it in the river on her way to buy coffee the next morning. An American woman out for a walk, nothing suspicious, no one would even look twice. The moral calculus had already been done, whatever he'd been planning, and she knew he'd been planning something, could feel it in the quality of his watching. She would prevent it, not just for herself, but for whoever came after. Because men like this didn't stop. The watching was foreplay. The violence would come eventually. She was simply moving the timeline, taking control of the narrative, transforming from watch to watcher. On day 51, Adrian left for a 3-day conference in Vienna. You could come with me, he'd offered, guilty about leaving her alone. She'd smiled and declined, said she was actually feeling better, more settled. Had even made a friend at the cafe. This was a lie, but he'd looked so relieved that she hadn't corrected it. The night after he left, Nina sat in the dark and watched the watcher watch her apartment. Her hand rested on the knife, still in its packaging. The weight of it felt right, certain. At 2:17 a.m., when the street went dark, she stood up. The walk across felt longer than 4 minutes, stretched and strange, like moving through water. His building's entrance hadn't quite caught. Someone had entered just minutes before. She timed it perfectly. The stairs echoed with her footsteps, but it was late enough that no one emerged to investigate. 5th floor, corner unit, left side. She stood outside his door with the knife ready, blade down against her leg, knocked 3 times. Footsteps inside, not hurried. He wasn't alarmed. The door opened. He was taller than she'd expected, thinner, gaunt in a way that suggested illness or obsession, the same hollow-cheeked face she'd seen in the grocery store. His eyes met hers with something like recognition, like he'd been expecting her, like this was simply the next part of their dance. "You," he said, in accented but clear English, not surprised, almost pleased. She pushed forward, knife already moving, already committed. No hesitation, no second thoughts. She'd used up all her uncertainty in the days of planning. He stumbled backward and she followed, crossing the threshold into air that smelled wrong, stale, chemical, photographic, developing fluid mixing with unwashed living. The knife went into his stomach easier than she'd expected, a resistance like cutting through tough meat and then sudden give. And he made a sound that wasn't quite a scream, more like surprise, like he'd been startled by pain he hadn't anticipated. His hands came up, grabbed her wrist, not fighting exactly, more like trying to understand what was happening. His grip was weak. She pulled the knife out. The sound was wet, obscene, and the blade came free, dripping. But as she pulled it back for the second strike, her hand touched his bare arm and the world fractured. Faces. Dozens of them. Women, all foreign-looking, all isolated and alone, in windows, in photographs, in positions they didn't know they'd been observed in, private moments made public through his lens, some of them recent, the photographs still sharp, some faded like old Polaroids, yellowed at the edges, different apartments, different cities, different years stretching back further than she'd imagined. One of them was on his floor, red hair spread in a halo, eyes open but empty. He'd kept her for 3 days. He moved between cities, found women who wouldn't be believed, who existed in the gaps between languages and communities, documented them with obsessive precision, waited, eventually. The vision lasted less than a second, a psychic testimony from all the ones who'd come before, channeled through skin contact and adrenaline and the specific clarity that comes from doing violence. Nina didn't question it, couldn't afford to, didn't have time to wonder if it was real or her own mind justifying what she was doing. She put the knife in him again. This time he tried to speak, blood on his lips, but she didn't let him finish. Again. The knife found soft places, stomach, chest, throat. She kept going until he stopped making sounds, until the testimony of previous victims faded back into memory, until her arm was tired and he was a shape on the floor that no longer looked human, until she was absolutely, completely certain. The apartment was exactly what she'd expected. Cameras, lenses, tripods arranged with obsessive precision. But it was the photographs that made her stomach turn. They covered one entire wall. Her, mostly, but others too. Women in windows, women in grocery stores, women walking home from work, women who thought they were alone. She was there in dozens of images, brushing her teeth, reading on the couch, standing at the window with tea, sleeping. How had he gotten photographs of her sleeping? The angles were wrong for his window. He'd been closer, inside the building somehow, or... She couldn't think about it, wouldn't. The others were there too, the red-haired woman, alive in earlier photos, laughing at something on her phone, a dark-haired woman who looked Indian or Pakistani, eating dinner alone, an Asian woman, Korean maybe, doing yoga in her living room, dozens of them. Some of the photographs were years old, judging by the fading and the outdated clothing. This wasn't recent obsession. This was pattern, practice, refined technique. She found the hard drives in a filing cabinet, labeled with dates, and what she assumed were names or locations in a language she couldn't read. All of them, methodical, thinking clearly despite the blood cooling sticky on her hands and the body on the floor behind her. She took them all, put them in a plastic bag she found under his sink. There was a notebook too, smaller than hers but serving the same purpose. Documentation, times, dates, movements. She flipped through pages of handwriting she couldn't decipher, but the timestamps were universal. He'd been watching her for 63 days, not 51. He'd started before they'd even moved in, had somehow known they were coming. She took the notebook too. The walk home took 6 minutes. She stopped halfway across the dark street and looked up at her own window, imagined what she'd looked like from his perspective all these weeks. A woman in a window, backlit and unaware. Not anymore. She showered until the water ran cold, bagged the knife and the hard drives together. In the morning, she would walk to the river. Adrian returned from Vienna 3 days later, full of stories about the conference. Nina listened and smiled and felt the weight of what she'd done settling into her bones like radiation, invisible but permanent. The watcher's window across the street stayed dark. After 2 weeks, someone came and cleared out the apartment. She watched them work, cataloging boxes and furniture removal the way she'd once cataloged his presence. A month later, new tenants moved in, a young couple. The woman reminded Nina of herself, blonde and foreign-looking, moving through the apartment with the uncertain gestures of displacement. On her first night, the woman came to the window and looked out at the city. Nina watched from her own window, teacup cooling in her hands. The woman didn't see her, turned away after a moment, back to the lit interior of her new life. Nina stayed at the window longer, watching, making sure. She was capable of killing now. The knowledge sat in her chest like a second heart, steady and sure. She had crossed a line she could never uncross, had transformed into something harder and colder and more dangerous than she ever imagined herself becoming. But she had survived. That counted for something. And if she ever saw someone watching that window the way she'd been watched, if she ever recognized that particular quality of observation, predatory and patient, she would know exactly what to do. The watching, she'd learned, worked both ways.
If you enjoyed this video, please do not forget to like, comment, or share this video with your friends. Subscribe to our channel to hear more stories like this one.